Synthetic drugs. They're cheap, easy to access, can be purchased online, and in many cases aren't illegal, yet. The flavors and graphics are specifically designed to be marketed to teens. Even worse, they're much more potent and have been the cause of more and more frequent overdose deaths. Synthetic drugs are new to many of us. For some of you, you may be hearing about them for the very first time. But if you're a parent, it is so critically important that you understand them, what they look like, how they affect those who take them, and what to tell your kids about them.
Well, synthetic drugs are drugs that are designed or they're made in a lab somewhere. So generally, your common drugs are drugs that are made in, some plant will have some psychoactive substance as part of what the plant does, and so people can pull that out of the plant and isolate that and use that as a drug. What chemists can do is they understand. They know what the receptor sites look like that these drugs interact with, and they know the chemical shape of the common drug that they're using. And so they can then design a drug that has a similar chemical structure as the common drug to interact with that specific receptor. And then more interestingly, and more problematically, unfortunately, is that we know what the receptor sites for specific neurotransmitters look like. And so they can design a drug that will interact with that receptor very strongly, and many times much more strongly than the original intended ligand for that receptor site. And that creates problems for anyone taking those drugs because it wasn't necessarily meant to do that. That receptor site isn't meant to be interacted with so strongly many times, and so that creates problems for the entire system. And to backtrack a little bit, all drugs are going to hijack that neurotransmission system somehow, and I mean that's how they do their business. That's how you get the senses of euphoria, and that's how drugs work, and that's where the highs come from. And so chemists know how to take advantage of that system, and they can design those drugs specifically to those neurotransmitter sites and take over that system. And so unfortunately, it's not meant to be taken by humans. It's meant to be used in research to be able to identify where those neurotransmitters are. That's what they're used for. And so there's a lot of research in pharmacology, and that's kind of how they go through this process as well. The schools that the professors are working at, they're going to publish those results, and once they publish those results, any rogue chemist anywhere in the world can look at that and say, oh, I can use that then, and it's an outline of how exactly you do that research and build that specific molecule that is going to act as a mimic of LSD or a mimic of cocaine or a mimic of THC. And so even though they're not meant to be used in the human body, and indeed most of these drugs, even in the research side of things, have never been given to humans, we have a lot of people in that research chemical subculture that use those as drugs. And so that's kind of where the synthetic drug movement has come from. It started with the synthetic cannabinoids, and now it's kind of spread out all over the place at this point in time. So.
Synthetic drugs are categorized into 3 groups or 3 generations based on when they emerged.
We have what we consider to be, at least right now, 3 generations of synthetics. And what that means is simply the first generation of synthetics was your synthetic pot or synthetic cannabinoids. And that was your spice and your K2. I think a lot of people are familiar with that. That also included your bath salts. Bath salts, obviously, we know were not real bath salts. They were marketed as that, but that's synthetic cathinones. And that was a synthetic, let's call it synthetic cocaine. But it had some also properties of, say, PCP involved in that. That's why we saw such strange cases with bath salts. And that was the generation 1. And when we say generation 1, it simply means that was the first generation or the first groups of these synthetics that we saw hit out here. And unfortunately, we were, as a parent and as law enforcement, I think we were far behind those because we didn't know what they were. And they were the ones that were being sold at the convenience stores right up by the register in plain view, and we walked by them how many times to get our coffee or to get whatever we were using there, and we were just oblivious to it. When I say the generation 2 synthetics, those are those synthetics that were sold as plant food, bonsai tree fertilizer, iPod screen cleaners, and they just have a different active ingredient that were not controlled or scheduled as a controlled substance at that point in time. And so that was the Generation 2. The Generation 3 synthetics are going to be your substituted phenethylamines, and that's going to be, let's just call it your synthetic LSD. That's the Generation 3 stuff, and it's the most problematic, mainly because of dosage issues more than anything else. It's so easily overdosed on.
So what exactly do these synthetic drugs do to our brains, and why are the effects so much worse than other drugs?
One of the biggest issues is that they're so potent, and they're designed to interact with specific receptors. Your brain is not necessarily wired to accept the potency of some of these drugs, and it creates imbalances chemically and then a lot of times structurally in the brain that sometimes cannot be corrected. When you start corrupting the system of neurotransmission that has to do with levels of dopamine and serotonin, that can create significant psychological problems for the user, short-term and long-term. All drugs, it doesn't matter if it's alcohol, THC from marijuana, crack cocaine, they all act in their own ways. They all have different mechanisms for doing it, but they will all act to take that system over. The problem with synthetics is that they're just more potent, and they're more efficient at doing that, and for good reason, because they were designed specifically for that. So.
One of the biggest challenges of synthetic drugs is the dosage and the likelihood of overdosing.
Synthetics is that they're active at even heavy dosages at the sub-milligram level. So what you have to do, and we call those micrograms. So to get your mind wrapped around what a microgram is, you take one sugar granule in your magic little knife and you cut it up into 1,000 equal pieces, that one granule. And one of those little tiny specks that you probably can't even see with your human eye is a microgram. That means you have to take a sugar granule, cut it in half, and that's what we consider to be a heavy dose. Well, obviously, dosage control is a big issue with any of the synthetics because the way that they're packaged and sold on the street is not done in a lab. The active ingredient was created in a lab somewhere, but beyond that, the dosage and how it's put together is done in someone's basement somewhere. It's done in a warehouse somewhere, and no one really knows kind of who puts that together. Are they high on the stuff when they're making it? And so how can you trust them? And if you're dealing with a substance that's at the sub-milligram level, a very, very small mistake in your mathematics or your calculations or how you do the chemistry of it to put it onto the blotter papers can mean an overdose. Not only that, but there is an ignorance on the side of the user. Many times with some of these Generation 3 synthetics, they will take an hour to feel any of the effects. Well, they're not used to that. And so what happens a lot of times with these overdoses is that they'll take one of those blotter tabs, not feel anything within a few minutes, and then say, well, I must have had a faulty tab or something with a very low dosage on it, and then double dose on it or triple dose on it at that point, trying to get the effects of it, and then all of a sudden you've overdosed at that point in time. In the United States, we've had several hundred kids that have OD'd on these new Generation 3 synthetics, and most times what happens is that you're going to have a party of kids, and these drugs are introduced at the party, and maybe they are introduced as ecstasy or the 2C series or a different type of synthetic, and the kids take them thinking that's what they're taking, and then we'll see 15, 16, 17 kids show up at the hospital that they've overdosed on these things, and of those 17, you'll see one or two that die usually.
So why are synthetic drugs so popular with this current generation?
It seems like every generation has its specific drug. With the younger generation, the kids that I talk to a lot, the frontier of drug use are the synthetic drugs because for teens, first of all, they're fairly cheap as compared to the common drug that it's mimicking, and they're much more potent than the common drug usually. And so it's a double whammy for a kid who generally doesn't have a lot of money, and it's a huge bang for the buck when it comes to that. The problem is that they're not thinking about they haven't been educated as to what it's doing inside their brain and the effects that it's having, because these chemicals and these substances were never meant to be introduced into the human body in the form that they are now.
We mentioned that the cost of these synthetic drugs is so much cheaper than other drugs, but you might be surprised at just how cheap they really are.
The street value of the blotter tabs of NBOMe here, the 25I that we've confiscated here, you're looking at $4 per tab or $4 per dose if you think about that. And it's long lasting, 6 to 12 hours that you're going to have effects for that, as opposed to some common drug which is much shorter than that.
Not only is it cheap to buy on the streets, but the profit margins are very high for the street dealers, making the drug even more prevalent.
You don't have the cartels that you're going to have in common drugs. The dealers will buy this directly off the internet, and so you have the cartels are replaced then by a website that's based in Canada, based in Europe or Russia or Chechnya or China, and so what they're doing is buying the bulk active ingredients. And so and a perfect example is one the website that I looked at recently that was out of Europe, and for $160 American dollars. They could buy a gram of to the 25I NBOME. And, you know, at first glance, you're like, well, that's not a whole lot of money. That's a lot of money for not, you know, for a small amount of drugs. However, if you look at the dosage levels of a gram, if a heavy dose of NBOME is half of a milligram, then a gram will give you 2,000 doses of that. And so you sell that at street value at $4 a dose, and you have $8,000 that you've made off of a $160 investment. And anyone that doesn't care what they're doing to the kids can go out and do that with a credit card and buy that and have it shipped here. That's the issue, and that's the scary part about this. You know, you can go online and buy the tabs that are already pre-made if you're just going to be a user. But you know, sometimes I look at it and I'm like, well, with the economy the way it is and the things the way they're going, you know, people are struggling. And if you're kind of on that line of do I want to, you know, put my morals aside and do this, and you see the amount of money that you can make, I think it pushes a lot of people into that.
So what do these synthetic drugs look like, and how could you as a parent identify them?
With the Generation 3 synthetics, they come in two different forms really as far as how kids are going to end up taking these drugs. One is going to be a capsule form, and so it looks like just a generic blank looking clear capsule that has a couple of milligrams of powder in it. Blotting paper is an artistic tool. I mean, you can go to the local artist stores and buy those, and they have legitimate purposes, and they're about the size of, I'd say, half of a postage stamp. Many times they're colorful, and that's just kind of like the history of LSD and how they've done it in the past, and it's the same thing. The ones that we've confiscated locally have been tie-dyed looking colors, but they can have other things printed on them, and they're perforated, and so they're meant to be torn off in little pieces, and each one of those pieces are the dosages of the drug. And so what the kids are going to do at that point in time is take that little postage stamp or half a postage stamp piece of paper that has the active ingredient on it and put it underneath their tongue. And then, you know, it transfers then buccally into the bloodstream. And so that's what you're looking for, those little pieces of paper that look kind of something like a child would actually have. As a parent, one of the red flags, and I always teach this in my classes, as far as how to identify synthetic drugs as opposed to anything else that your teen might have, is the labeling. And so some of the things you look for in the packaging is not for human consumption, all right? And that's how they get around the FDA regulation, and that's how they sell it in the United States without going through that FDA regulation. Secondly, it may say does not contain JWH18, HU210, or a host of other little acronyms for chemicals. Third, especially with the Generation 3 synthetics, is you're looking for a powder form of a substance that's may be labeled with a chemical name that's 25 or 30 letters long with dashes, something that you don't recognize, or they may have the chemical structure on it. It'll also say not for human consumption. That's the bulk product. Generally, that's indicative of someone that is selling the synthetics, the Generation 3 synthetics. If you're using it, then you're looking for the capsules that just have a little bit of powder in it. It's not full of anything like you would expect to see with a capsule of legitimate medicine, or the blotter tabs. Those are the ones that are really kind of problematic for us right now, the blotter tabs. That's specific to the Generation 3 synthetics.
So what exactly is the prevalence of these synthetic drugs right here in Mesa County?
Historically, the synthetics, they're going to come from Europe. They're going to generally, as far as the synthetics being used as a drug, we'll start over there, and then it'll move to our coast, and then we see it move from the coast to Middle America, in Grand Junction, Colorado, obviously. Generally, that takes a couple of years, but as they've refined that process over the years, as that industry, that subculture has, you move that up from years to months at this point. And so anything that's new and brand new in Europe will be here within just a matter of months usually. So what we do is we will track the drug forums, and what we do is look for chatter in those forums that are regional, and we know then that people that are using the drugs, if they're close, they're probably here.
And what are the trends that we're seeing?
There's a chemist right now in a laboratory somewhere that is building the next active substance that's going to be used as the next generation of synthetics, and it's not going to be illegal in most cases. And so, and we're going to be chasing this around. In 2011, it was a $56 billion a year industry synthetic drugs were in the United States. That's not going anywhere. There's no there's no reason for those that are making these and producing these and selling these that's making so much money to stop doing it. And so they know how to get around the system. They know how to package it and label it, and so that they can sell it in the United States legally. And they're becoming experts at doing this. And so we're going to be chasing it around. We just have to be smart enough to be able to recognize it when we see it, know what we're looking at, and work hand in hand with our legislatures to be sure that we can do everything we can to keep these out of our kids' hands.
Most likely, if you're a parent of a teen or preteen, some of what you've heard has been a bit disturbing. So as a parent, what should you do?
You know, to be a good parent these days, or to be an informed parent, you know, along with your 40-hour plus a week job and everything else you have to do as a parent, you have to be an IT expert, and you have to be a drug recognition expert. And there's so much out there to know that, and if you're not constantly, and who can at this point, keeping up with it, you just get outpaced with it. And so it's our goal then to say, okay, this is exactly what we're seeing on our streets, real time, and this is what these drugs look like. This is what they are. These are why the kids have them. This is what can happen, and let's take a look at places like Minnesota and Louisiana, and look at other cases where kids have died on these drugs and why they're dying on these drugs. And because we know for fact that the best communication and the best conversations happen between parents and their kids. You know, I get 1 hour a month with them, but the parents have them every single day, and to talk about this and to reinforce this.
If you're a teenager watching this program, there are some very important things that you should know.
You have to make a decision as a teen whether or not you're going to do this. And you know, I do my teen classes exactly how I do my adult classes, because ultimately they're young adults. We're not there when they make these decisions, but they have to know the dangers of what they're doing. If someone hands them a capsule that they have no idea what it is and tells them it's ecstasy, or tells them it's 2CI, or if it's 2CB, they have to understand what it is that they're getting ready to put in their body. And then beyond that, whether or not it's marijuana, alcohol, or you know, some of these more problematic synthetics that we're dealing with, what is it doing to your brain short and long term, right? This molecule that you're taking or snorting or smoking, you know, it's going to enter your body. Let's follow it around for a few minutes, and let's see where it ends up and what it does exactly, and how that affects your brain short and long term. And then that gives them, I think, a lot of information to then go and make a decision on what they want to do. You know, if they're presented with this drug, we talk to them about the problems that we've seen in other communities with kids overdosing on it and why they're overdosing on it. Because if they are presented with it, I want them to be sure that they understand that they can overdose very easily on this drug. And so, you know, if they make the decision that they're going to use it, I would prefer at that point in time, if I can't talk them out of using it, hey, don't kill yourself with it, right? And have as much information as possible for our teens. So that's kind of where we target teens and target parents as far as education. It's really just sharing the information that we know. It's a good, I guess, central repository of information for them to move forward. And this is what we see here. This is what we've seen in the country. These are the dangers of this specific drug. You have the information, and you have to make your own decisions on it.
We are just at the ground floor of this synthetic drug epidemic. It's likely to get much worse before it gets better. If you'd like more information on this topic, visit the website on the screen.
So it is the frontier of drugs as far as what the new generation, what the younger generations are into, and we're going to see it for a while. So we might as well know what we're looking at.